music stopped. In the great hall of Thornhaven's stronghold, 300 wolves fell silent as one. The sound that had halted their revelry was simple, brutal, a body hitting stone. Not the elegant stumble of too much wine, not the theatrical swoon of a noble lady seeking attention. This was the heavy, graceless collapse of someone whose legs had simply given out. Lyra Ashford lay among shattered goblets on the black granite floor. Blood pooled beneath her head, spreading in a slow crimson halo. Her bald scalp caught the torchlight, 17 fresh cuts weeping red, where silver had scraped bone just hours before. The rough servant's dress she wore had torn at the shoulder when she fell, exposing more scars, old ones layered like a map of cruelty written in raised tissue and discolored skin. 300 pairs of eyes stared down at her, waiting. The protocol was clear. When servants collapsed in the great hall, guards removed them. Quietly, efficiently. The celebration would resume as if nothing had happened, as if the broken Omega bleeding on their floor was no more significant than spilled wine. But the guards did not move, because AlphaKing Caliph Draven had risen from his throne. The man they called the Shadow Wolf moved through the crowd with deadly grace. He was tall, easily a head above most of the nobles who scattered from his path. Broad-shouldered beneath black leather and steel, his dark hair was pulled back from a face that might have been handsome if it wasn't so clearly built for violence. Scars traced his jawline. A thick white line cut through his left eyebrow. His eyes were the color of amber, catching firelight, and right now those eyes were locked on the girl bleeding at the center of his hall. He dropped to his knees in the spreading pool of blood. The court gasped. Alpha Kings did not kneel. Not for visiting dignitaries. Not for elder councils. Certainly not for unconscious servant girls with shaved heads and scarred skin. Caliph gathered Lyra into his arms as if she weighed nothing, as if she was something precious instead of something broken. Her head lolled against his chest, blood smeared across the dark leather of his armor. He didn't seem to notice, didn't seem to care about the crimson staining his hands, his sleeves, his chest. His eyes swept the silent hall. When he spoke, his voice was granite and gravel and barely leashed rage. Mine. The word landed like a hammer blow. Not a question, not a request, a claim, an absolute statement of ownership that carried the weight of royal decree and something far more primal. The mate bond erupted between them. Golden light blazed from where Caliph's hands touched Lyra's skin, spread like wildfire through the hall, brighter than the torches, brighter than the massive fire roaring in the hearth. The sacred light of a true mate bond, impossible to fake, impossible to deny, recognized by every wolf who witnessed it. The court recoiled, shielding their eyes, gasping, whispering, because this wasn't possible. This couldn't be real. The broken servant girl with the shaved head and the scar-covered skin couldn't be the mate of the most powerful alpha in the Northern Territories. But the bond blazing between them said otherwise. Elder Aldrich Grey stepped forward, his weathered face creased with confusion. My king, surely there's been some... Anyone? Caliph cut him off, voice dropping to a growl that raised the hair on every neck in the hall, who questions what I'm seeing right now can step forward. Immediately. No one moved. Anyone who heard her. His eyes flashed pure molten gold as his wolf surged closer to the surface. Anyone who laid hands on her, who spoke cruelty to her, who allowed her to suffer, answers to me. The silence that followed was absolute. Caliph stood Lyra limp in his arms, blood still dripping from her head to mark a trail across the stone floor. Get the healers. Now. He looked down at the woman in his arms. Hold on, he murmured, so quietly only she could have heard if she'd been conscious. Just hold on. I've got you. He carried her from the hall, leaving 300 witnesses to process what they'd just seen, and one woman in the corner, whose beautiful face had gone bone white with horror. Seraphine Ashford pressed herself against the stone wall, her golden hair tumbling around her shoulders, her elegant silk gown suddenly feeling like a noose. This wasn't how tonight was supposed to go. This wasn't supposed to happen at all. Because 2 hours ago in the village square of Ashenvale, Seraphine had made very sure that Lyra Ashford would never be seen as anything but broken. 2 hours earlier, Ashenvale Village Square, 20 miles south of Thornhaven. The crowd had gathered quickly. Word spread fast in a small packed territory. The eldest Ashford daughter was calling for public discipline. Again, 200 wolves pressed into the cobblestone square, forming a loose circle around the wooden platform at its center. Lyra knelt on those cobblestones, hands bound behind her back with rough hemp rope. Her knees ached where bone met stone. The late afternoon sun beat down on her head, on the dark hair that hung to her waist. The last thing about her appearance she'd been allowed to take pride in. Not for much longer. Seraphine circled her sister slowly, her pale blue dress swirling around her ankles. In her right hand, she held a blade. Not steel, silver. The metal that burned wolf flesh left scars that never fully healed. The blade was deliberately dull. Lyra could see where the edge had been ground, down a rounded, made blunt. Her sister wanted this to hurt. "Look at her," Seraphine announced to the crowd, her voice carrying the practiced sweetness she used when twisting the knife deepest. 21 years old, still unbonded, every eligible wolf in 3 territories had the chance to claim her at last week's Harvest Moon ceremony. Not one even showed interest. Not a flicker of recognition. Someone in the crowd laughed. Widow Harmon's cackle sharp and mean. "Do you know what that means?" Seraphine stopped in front of Lyra, forcing her sister to look up. "It means the bond doesn't want you. Your own wolf doesn't want you. You're defective. Damaged goods." Lyra kept her eyes down. 12 years had taught her that meeting Seraphine's gaze only made things worse. "But I'm merciful," Seraphine continued, addressing the crowd again. "I'm going to help her, make her presentable for what she actually is." She grabbed a fistful of Lyra's dark hair, yanking hard enough to make her gasp. The silver blade touched scalp, scraped, burned. Lyra bit down on her scream-tasted copper as her teeth cut into her tongue. The blade was so dull it didn't cut cleanly, it tore, ripped, scraped away hair and skin together. Silver touched exposed scalp, and the burn was immediate, searing a brand of shame carved into her skull. Hair fell in clumps around her knees, long dark strands that had taken years to grow. Seraphine worked with deliberate slowness, making sure every scrape of that dull silver blade was felt, witnessed, remembered. "There," Seraphine said after what felt like hours but was probably only 20 minutes. She held up a polished bronze mirror. "Isn't that better? Now everyone knows exactly what you are just by looking." Lyra stared at her reflection. The bald stranger staring back looked broken. Looked like she deserved this. 17 cuts wept blood down her scalp, down her neck, soaking into the collar of her rough servant's dress. Where Seraphine had been careless or deliberately cruel, the silver had left burn marks, patches of reddened skin that would scar. She looked exactly like what Seraphine had called her. Damaged. Defective. Wrong. "The Alpha King arrives tonight," Elder Aldrich's voice cut through the murmuring crowd. "For the claiming ceremony, every unbonded female of age will present themselves in Thornhaven's great hall at sunset." Lyra's stomach lurched. The claiming ceremony where Alpha King Calith Draven, the man they called the Shadow Wolf who'd killed 47 enemies in the Bloodridge Massacre, would choose a mate from among the offered daughters of the Northern Territories. Every noble family would parade their finest, hoping to catch his eye and secure their bloodline's future. Seraphine leaned close, her whisper cutting. "You'll stay in your cottage, hidden, door barred from inside. If the Alpha King sees you, if our family is associated with this," she gestured at Lyra's mutilated head, "I promise you'll wish I'd only taken your hair." The crowd parted to let Seraphine through, her golden hair catching sunlight like a crown, her smile sharp as knives. The Widow Harmon spat in Lyra's direction as she passed. Others simply turned away, unwilling to be associated with the shameful display. Lyra stayed kneeling on the cobblestones long after the crowd dispersed. Blood dripped into her eyes. The late afternoon sun beat down on her raw, exposed scalp. Her bound wrists had gone numb. No one came to untie her. Eventually, she worked the ropes loose, herself fingers, clumsy and shaking, rose on unsteady legs. The square was empty now. Even the children who usually played here had been called away, parents not wanting them contaminated by proximity to Ashenvale's shame. Lyra touched her head with trembling fingers, felt the unfamiliar smoothness of exposed scalp, the rough patches where silver had burned, the sticky warmth of blood still seeping from the deeper cuts. She'd been many things in her 21 years, servant, prisoner, scapegoat, punching bag, but she'd never been this. Marked, mutilated, made into a visible warning of what happened to wolves who failed to fulfill their purpose. The cottage at the forest's edge sat dark and cold, but it was hers, the only space Seraphine allowed her, probably because it was barely habitable. Lyra stumbled inside, barred the door, and finally let herself collapse. She didn't cry. 12 years had taught her that tears were a luxury she couldn't afford. They made her eyes swell, made her movements sluggish, made the next day's work that much harder. And there was always work. Always some way Seraphine found to remind Lyra of her place, her debt, her complete lack of worth or autonomy. 340,000 silver crowns. That's what her father had lost in the blood duel when Lyra was 9 years old. The Ashford family land's fortune, reputation gambled away in a single afternoon of drunken pride. He died in that dual throat, torn out by a wolf twice his size, and left his daughters with nothing but crushing debt. Seraphine had been 14, already bonded to Alpha Rowan of Ashenvale. Already beautiful, already cunning, already learning how to turn circumstance into opportunity. She'd taken custody of her 9-year-old sister and installed her as an indentured servant to repay the family dishonor. 12 years later, Lyra was still repaying. She moved to the cracked basin in the corner, needing to see the damage in privacy. The water was ice cold from the well, and she hissed when it touched the raw wounds. Her reflection wavered in the basin's dark surface, a bald skull covered in cuts and burns, eyes too large and a too thin face, cheekbones sharp from years of eating, last and least. She looked like a victim, like prey, like exactly what Seraphine had made her. The old head wrap sat folded in the corner. Delicate things Lyra had embroidered with silver thread during the few quiet hours she'd been allowed back when she'd still had hope. Back when she'd believed a mate bond would come eventually, that she'd be chosen, that she'd matter. She fed them to the small hearth fire one by one, watched the thread blacken and curl. The flames felt cleansing, appropriate. By dawn, she'd planned to be gone. Over the mountains into the eastern territories where no one knew her name or her shame. Where she could disappear into obscurity and stop waiting for a bond that would never come. At least I'll be aerodynamic when I'm running for my life, she thought, and laughed once. The sound came out sharp and bitter as poison echoing in the empty cottage. This was her future. Alone, running, marked by her sister's cruelty forever. She touched her raw scalp one final time, memorizing the feel of her humiliation. Tomorrow she'd run. Tonight she'd burn everything that reminded her she'd once believed she deserved better. But Lyra didn't know that 20 miles north in Thornhaven's council chamber, AlphaKing Draven had just dismissed his advisors early. Didn't know he'd walked to the balcony overlooking the valley, restless in a way he couldn't name. Didn't know that the wind had shifted, carrying scents from the southern villages up through the mountain passes. Didn't know that he'd gone completely still, his hands gripping the stone balustrade hard enough to crack it, his wolf surging forward with desperate recognition. Rain after long drought, wild jasmine blooming in hidden places, something that felt like coming home after years of searching. He'd scented that exact combination 17 times in 2 years. Always faint, always muted, buried under other smells, wood smoke and horse sweat, in the general scent of packed territory. Never strong enough to identify the source. But every time he'd visited Ashenvale on diplomatic business, his wolf had paced and whined, searching for something unnamed. Now the scent hit him full force. Undiluted, clear as a bell ringing across the valley. His mate. Kayla's eyes flashed gold. His wolf surged so close to the surface that his canines lengthened, his nails sharpened to claws. Every instinct screamed at him to shift, to run, to find her immediately. He forced himself to breathe, to think. The claiming ceremony was in 3 hours. Every eligible female in the territory would be there, including whoever carried this scent. He could wait 3 hours. He could be patient. His wolf howled in protest, but Caliph had spent his entire adult life learning control, learning to be the ruthless, calculating king his people needed instead of the feral wolf that lived under his skin. 3 hours, then he'd find her, claim her. And 2 years of restless searching. He didn't know that in a cottage at the forest's edge his mate was packing to run. Didn't know about the silver burns on her scalp or the scars covering her body. Didn't know about 12 years of systematic torture or the sister who'd made sure Lyra Ashford would never believe herself worthy of being chosen. Didn't know that in 3 hours, when every eligible female was presented in his hall, the one woman whose scent called to him like coming home would be locked in a cellar, hidden away like something shameful. But he'd find her anyway, because Caliph Draven had been searching for 2 years and his wolf would not be denied. The claiming ceremony began at sunset. Thornhaven's great hall had been transformed. Hundreds of candles in iron sconces, fresh rushes on the floor, the massive hearth roaring with a fire that pushed back the autumn chill. Banners from 6 different territories hung from the vaulted ceiling, green and gold, crimson and black, silver and blue. 300 wolves packed the space. Not just Thornhaven's residents, but visiting nobles from across the northern territories, all come to witness their king finally choose a mate. 40 eligible daughters stood in a line before the throne, each one carefully selected, extensively vetted. The finest the territories had to offer. Beautiful, well-bred, trained from birth in the politics and protocols required of a queen. Seraphine Ashford stood at the front of that line. She'd changed from the simple blue dress she'd worn in Ashenvale. Now she wore deep emerald silk that made her golden hair seem to glow. Tiny crystals sewn into the bodice caught candlelight with every breath. She'd positioned herself perfectly close enough to be noticed immediately, far enough back to appear modest rather than presumptuous. Her late mate Alpha Rowan had died in a border skirmish 6 months ago. Convenient timing. She was freshly widowed, socially acceptable, and absolutely certain that she'd be chosen. She had the bloodline, the beauty, the experience, everything a king could want in a mate. And she'd made very sure that her broken, defective sister wouldn't be here to somehow ruin this moment. Seraphine had planned to lock Lyra in the cellar after the ceremony, secure her sister away where no eyes could find her, but in the chaos of preparing herself in her excitement over the king's arrival, she'd made a critical error. She'd left Lyra in the cottage, alone, unguarded, and Lyra, bleeding and desperate, had made a choice. She'd stumbled through the forest in darkness, following the torchlight of Thornhaven 20 miles north, had arrived at the kitchen entrance at dawn, a bald, bleeding girl begging for work. The head cook, moved by pity, had set her to washing dishes in the scullery. Seraphine assumed her sister was locked away, safe, contained. She had no idea Lyra was already inside the stronghold when the ceremony began. Elder Aldrich Grey stepped forward to begin the formal presentations. Alpha King Caliph Draven, we gather tonight to present the finest unmated females of... Caliph stood abruptly. The hall fell silent. Every eye turned to their king. He wasn't looking at the line of presented daughters, wasn't looking at Aldrich, or the assembled nobles, or the elaborate preparations. His eyes had gone pure molten gold, his wolf so close to the surface that the air around him seemed to shimmer with barely restrained power. His head turned toward the eastern passage, the one that led to the kitchens, the servant quarters, the forgotten corners of the stronghold where common wolves worked. Where is she? His voice was rough, distorted by the wolf pushing at his control. Confusion rippled through the court. Aldrich stammered, "My king, the presentations haven't..." But Caliph was already moving, not toward the line of eligible daughters, toward the kitchen passage, following a scent only he could detect, drawn by a pull that had nothing to do with protocol or politics, and everything to do with the mate bond singing in his blood. Seraphine's face drained of color. No, this wasn't possible. Lyra was locked away, hidden. There was no way. But then she remembered, this morning, the chaos of preparing for the claiming ceremony, the 1,000 details demanding attention. She'd forgotten the morning dose of wolfsbane. The first time in 12 years she'd missed it. The first time Lyra's natural scent would be unmasked. Kayla strode through the kitchen passage past servants who flattened themselves against walls, past copper pots and hanging herbs, and the general chaos of feast preparation. His focus was absolute. The scent was stronger here. Rain and jasmine and home, no longer muted, no longer buried. Close. She was close. He turned a corner, and there she was. Lyra Ashford knelt in the scullery, scrubbing plates in a wooden tub. Her bald head was wrapped in rough linen bandages, already soaking through with blood from the cuts that hadn't stopped weeping. She wore the same torn servant's dress from this afternoon, the shoulder still ripped, exposing the edge of what looked like old burn scars on her back. Her hands were red and raw from the harsh soap. She kept her eyes down, focused on her work, the practiced invisibility of someone who'd learned that being noticed meant being hurt. She didn't hear him approach, didn't realize he was there until his shadow fell across her workspace. Lyra looked up. The world stopped. The mate bond slammed into place like lightning striking. Golden light erupted between them, blazing undeniable, sacred. Every wolf in the stronghold felt it. That fundamental click of two souls recognizing each other, choosing each other, claiming each other on a level deeper than conscious thought. Caliph couldn't breathe, couldn't move, could only stare at this woman, this scarred, bleeding, broken-looking woman who knelt in dirty water, scrubbing plates, and feel his entire existence rearrange itself around her. Mine. His wolf's howl of recognition, of triumph, of absolute certainty. Behind him the court had followed, packed into the passage, craning to see what had caught their king's attention. Their gasps echoed off stone walls as they saw the golden light, saw the mate bond none of them had expected, saw who it connected to. Seraphine pushed through the crowd, desperation making her reckless. "My king, there's been a mistake. That's my sister. She's broken, damaged. She's unbonded because something's wrong with her." Caliph's eyes flashed pure gold as he turned his head to look at Seraphine. His voice, when it came, was barely human. "If you speak one more word, I will remove your tongue." Seraphine's mouth snapped shut. He turned back to Lyra, who hadn't moved. who knelt in the dirty water staring up at him with eyes that held too much pain, too much exhaustion, too much learned helplessness. She looked like she was waiting for the blow to fall, for this moment to be revealed as some cruel joke, for him to turn away in disgust. Instead, Caliph knelt, put himself at her eye level there in the dirty water of the scullery in front of 300 witnesses, offered his hand palm up. "What's your name?" His voice was gentle, so gentle it made her eyes burn. Lyra Ashford, AlphaKing. Not Ashford anymore. His hand remained steady, offered. "Lyra Draven, you're mine. Do you accept?" She stared at his hand, at the scars crossing his knuckles, the calluses from sword work, the strength evident in every line. Stared at his face, hard and scarred and utterly focused on her. Saw something in those amber eyes that looked like recognition, like coming home. Behind them, Seraphine made a strangled sound. The court held its collective breath. Lyra's hand shook as she lifted it from the dirty water. Soap suds dripped from her fingers. She was filthy and bleeding and broken looking, and he was a king, and this made no sense at all, but her hand found his anyway. The bond flared so bright that wolves in the passage shielded their eyes. Golden light blazing like a star, being born warm and sacred and absolutely undeniable. Kayla's fingers closed around hers, careful of her raw, work-damaged skin. He stood drawing her up with him. She stumbled, legs numb from kneeling, weak from blood loss, and he caught her easily, one arm around her waist supporting her weight like she was something precious. He turned to face the assembled court. Every noble who'd expected to witness him choose from their carefully prepared daughters. Every wolf who'd assumed the broken servant girl was beneath notice. "I am Caliph Draven, AlphaKing of the Northern Territories. I claim Lyra as my mate and queen. The bond has chosen. Anyone who questions this can step forward now and challenge me directly." No one moved. Anyone who heard her. His eyes swept the crowd, landing on Seraphine with deadly focus. Anyone who laid hands on her, spoke cruelty to her, allowed her to suffer, will answer to me. That includes you, Seraphine Ashford. Especially you. Seraphine's face had gone from pale to gray. "I was only trying to—" "Remove your tongue," Caliph reminded her, his voice a growl. She went silent. He looked down at Lyra, who still hadn't spoken, who looked like she couldn't quite process what was happening. Her free hand had gone to her bandaged head, touching it self-consciously. "We leave within the hour," he announced to the court. "Prepare the carriages." Then quieter, just for her, "Can you walk?" Lyra nodded, not trusting her voice. But when she took a step, her legs buckled. Blood loss and shock catching up all at once. Caliph caught her before she hit the floor, swept her into his arms, cradling her against his chest. She was so light, too light. He could feel every rib through the thin dress. Count the vertebrae in her spine where his hands supported her back. How long had they been starving her? The thought made his wolf snarl, made his eyes flash gold again. But he forced his voice to stay gentle as he looked down at the woman in his arms. "I've got you. Just hold on." Lyra's eyes fluttered closed. The last thing she saw before unconsciousness took her was his face, scarred and fierce, and focused on her with an intensity that should have been frightening, but somehow felt safe. The last thing she heard was his growl as someone Seraphine probably tried to speak. "Not another word, any of you, or I start making examples." Then darkness and the warm scent of cedar and smoke, and arms that held her like she was worth protecting. For the first time in 12 years, Lyra Ashford felt safe. Lyra woke to softness. That was wrong. That was impossible. She slept on a straw pallet in the cottage cellar, thin and lumpy, where rats sometimes ran across her feet in the dark. She woke to cold stone beneath her cheek, to the ache of muscles that never fully relaxed, to the knowledge that another day of servitude stretched ahead. This was different. Thick blankets, a mattress that yielded beneath her weight like a cloud. Warmth seeping into bones that had been cold for so long she'd forgotten what comfort felt like. For a moment before full consciousness returned, Lyra let herself sink into it. Pretended this was real. Pretended she deserved soft things. Then memory crashed back. The scullery, the AlphaKing, golden light, the mate bond. Her eyes snapped open. The room was unlike anything she'd ever seen. Massive, easily 4 times the size of her entire cottage. Stone walls hung with rich tapestries depicting forest scenes and running wolves. A fireplace large enough to stand in crackled with flames that pushed back the pre-dawn chill. Thick furs covered the floor. The bed she lay in could have held 5 people comfortably, its posts carved from dark wood into the shapes of wolves mid-leap. This wasn't a room. This was a sanctuary built for royalty. Lyra sat up too quickly, The world spun. Her hand went to her head, automatically found fresh bandages instead of the blood-soaked linen from before. Someone had changed them, cleaned the wounds, applied something that smelled like herbs and made the constant burning ache fade to a dull throb. Someone had undressed her. She looked down. The torn servant's dress was gone. In its place, a nightgown of material so fine she could see her skin through it, soft as a whisper against her scarred flesh. The kind of garment that cost more than she'd earned in a year of servitude. Panic clawed up her throat. This was wrong. This was some mistake, some cruel joke. And when Seraphine discovered where Lyra had ended up, the door opened. Caliph Draven stood in the doorway, and Lyra's breath caught. She'd seen him before, of course, 17 times in 2 years during his diplomatic visits to Ashenvale. But she'd always kept her eyes down, made herself invisible, avoided drawing the attention of someone so far above her station. She'd caught glimpses, broad shoulders, dark hair the way other wolves deferred to him, with a respect that bordered on fear. She'd never looked directly at him, never let herself notice details. Now she couldn't look away. He was tall enough that he had to duck slightly through the doorway, built like violence given form. Broad shoulders, muscled arms, hands that looked like they could crush stone, but held a simple wooden tray with careful precision. He'd removed his formal leather armor, wore only dark trousers and a simple linen shirt unlaced at the throat. His black hair hung loose around his shoulders instead of tied back. Without the trappings of kingship, he looked younger. Maybe 29, maybe 30. And exhausted. Dark circles shadowed eyes that were amber instead of the molten gold they'd been in the scullery. His jaw was rough with stubble. The hard lines of his face were softened by something that might have been relief when he saw she was awake. "You're up," he said. His voice was different too, still deep still, carrying that edge of command, but gentler, like he was trying not to startle a wounded animal. "That's good. The healer said that you might sleep through the day." Lyra realized she was staring and dropped her gaze immediately. 12 years of training reasserting itself. Servants didn't make eye contact, didn't speak unless spoken to, didn't Lyra. His voice cut through the spiral of learned behavior. "Look at me." Her eyes lifted against her will, found his, held. "You don't have to do that here," Caliph said quietly. "The bowing, the submission, the making yourself small. Not with me. Never with me." She didn't know what to say to that. Didn't know how to be anything other than what 12 years had made her. He crossed the room, set the tray on a table near the bed. Bread, cheese, dried fruit, a clay mug that steamed smelling of herbs and honey. Simple food, but more than she usually ate in 3 days. "The healers cleaned your wounds," he said, not quite meeting her eyes now. "I hope you don't mind. There was a lot of blood. They were worried about infection from the silver." Lyra's hand went to her head again. Felt the expert wrapping the slight tackiness of healing salve beneath the linen. "Who changed my clothes?" "Female servants. I made sure nobody's." He stopped seeming to struggle with something. "I didn't touch you, except to carry you from the carriage. I wouldn't, not without permission." The fact that an Alpha King, her mate, felt the need to clarify that he hadn't violated her while she was unconscious made something in Lyra's chest twist. She'd been violated in so many ways for so long that the concept of permission felt foreign. "Where am I?" The question came out barely above a whisper. "Thornhaven, my chambers." He gestured to the massive room. "I had servants prepare the Queen's suite, but it's 3 corridors away. I wanted you close, in case..." He didn't finish. Didn't need to. In case she woke up afraid. In case she needed him. Queen's suite. The words didn't make sense. Queens were elegant creatures like Seraphine, golden-haired and silver-tongued and whole. Not bald-scarred servant girls who scrubbed floors and knew 17 different ways to remove bloodstains from stone. "This is a mistake," Lyra heard herself say. "The bond. It has to be. I can't be." "You are." Kayla's voice was absolute. "The bond doesn't make mistakes. What I felt in that scullery, what every wolf in Thornhaven witnessed, that was real Lyra. As real as anything I've ever known." She shook her head, immediately regretted it as pain lanced through her skull. "You don't understand. I'm broken. Defective. There's something wrong with me." "Who told you that?" The question was soft, but carried an edge sharp enough to cut. Lyra's mouth opened, closed. How could she answer? Seraphine had told her. Every day, for 12 years. With words and fists and silver blades and locked cellars. Had told her so many times in so many ways that it had become truth. Fundamental as gravity. Inescapable as death, Caliph moved closer, knelt beside the bed so they were eye level just like he'd done in the scullery. This close, she could see the scars on his face more clearly, the thick white line through his eyebrow, smaller cuts along his jaw, a burn mark on his neck, partially hidden by his collar. "I noticed you," he said, quietly. "Every visit to Ashenvale over 2 years. The servant girl who hummed old songs while working, who fed stable cats scraps from her own meager portions, who smiled at children even when her own eyes held such pain." Lyra's breath caught. "I kept my head down, stayed invisible." "You tried to stay invisible, kept your head down, moved quietly. But I noticed the care you took with small things. The way you hummed old songs while working, how you fed the stable cats scraps from your own portions. The kindness you showed children, even when your own eyes held such pain. And every time I visited, I caught just a hint of your scent rain and jasmine, but it was always muted, buried." His amber eyes held hers. "Someone was hiding you. I just didn't know it was deliberate poisoning." Each detail hit like a physical blow. Because she did those things. Had done them thinking no one noticed, no one cared. The blue dress was her only garment that wasn't servant's brown, salvaged from her childhood, mended 100 times, because throwing it away would mean accepting she'd never be anything more than what Seraphine had made her. The stable cats were company when human contact meant pain. The children reminded her that innocence still existed somewhere in the world. "Why?" The question tore out of her. "Why would you notice someone like me?" "Because every time I visited, I caught your scent. Just a hint, rain after drought, well, jasmine, something that felt like coming home. But it was always muted, buried under other smells. I could never find the source." He paused. Someone was masking it, deliberately. Lyra's mind raced. 12 years of wolfsbane. 3 drops every morning in her food. Seraphine had said it was to calm her defective wool, to keep her stable. But wolfsbane didn't just suppress shifting. It suppressed everything wolf, including scent. "She poisoned me," Lyra whispered. "Every day, for 12 years. Caliph's eyes flashed gold, his hands clenched into fists against his thighs. When he spoke, his voice was rough with barely controlled rage. "Who? Seraphine, my sister, she—" The words stuck in her throat. 12 years of training, screaming that telling would only make things worse. That speaking against Seraphine meant punishment, meant pain. But Seraphine wasn't here. Couldn't reach her. Not with an Alpha King between them. "She gave me wolfsbane every morning. Said it was medicine. Said I needed it because I was unstable." The admission felt like bleeding. "I believed her. I thought there was something wrong with me, that I was broken. That's why I couldn't shift, couldn't—" She broke off, throat closing. Tears burned behind her eyes, but she forced them back. Crying was weakness. Weakness invited cruelty. Caliph was silent for a long moment. When he finally spoke, his voice was glacier cold. "Your sister has been systematically poisoning you since you were 9 years old to prevent you from bonding, to keep you weak and dependent." It wasn't a question. It was a statement of fact delivered with absolute certainty. Hearing it said aloud like that, clinical, clear, undeniable, made something crack open in Lyra's chest. "Yes," she whispered. "What else did she do?" The question was gentle but implacable. He wasn't going to let this go. Wasn't going to accept vague half-truths or protective evasions. Lyra looked at her hands, at the scars crossing her palms from kitchen knives and hot pots in the general violence of 12 years of servitude. At the 8-inch burn scar running up her forearm, silvered and raised impossible to hide. "When I was 14, an Alpha's son showed interest in me at the Harvest Festival. Nothing serious, he asked me to dance. Seraphine waited until that night, heated a silver poker in the hearth coals, held my arm over the flames while she pressed hot metal into my skin." Her voice was flat, emotionless. She'd learned to talk about her pain like it belonged to someone else. "Told everyone I'd burned myself in a fit of madness. After that, no one believed anything I said." Caliph made a sound low in his throat. Not quite a growl, not quite a whimper. Pain and rage combined. "When I was 17, I was invited to a regional Alpha gathering. First time anyone had included me in anything. Seraphine drugged my wine, locked me in the cellar for 5 days. No food, no water. Freezing cold." Lyra's fingers twisted in the fine nightgown. "She told everyone I was too ashamed of my low station to attend. Spread rumors that I was mentally unstable. After that, the whole pack believed I was mad. And yesterday," his voice was rough, "the Harvest Moon ceremony. I'm 21, still unbonded. Seraphine said I was a humiliation to the family bloodline. that she'd make me presentable for what I truly am. Lyra touched her bandaged head. She used a silver blade, deliberately dull, made sure it hurt, made sure it scarred, made sure everyone watched. The silence that followed was absolute. When Lyra finally looked up, Caleth's eyes were pure, molten gold. His wolf so close to the surface that she could see it in the way he held himself, rigid control, barely leashing feral violence. His hands had shifted partially, nails lengthening to claws before he forced them back to human. "I'm going to kill her." The words were matter of fact, a simple statement of intent. Slowly, publicly. "I'm going to make sure she understands exactly what she's done, and then I'm going to end her." Part of Lyra thrilled at the vindication, the promise of justice. But a larger part, the part that had survived 12 years by being small and quiet and causing no trouble, recoiled. "You can't. She was Alpha Rowan's mate. She has influence, connections. If you move against her without proof, I have all the proof I need." Caleth gestured to Lyra's bandaged head, her scarred arm, the too thin frame hidden by the nightgown. "You're sitting here covered in evidence of what she's done. My word against hers. And she's—" Lyra's voice cracked. "She's beautiful, eloquent. Everyone loves her. I'm just the mad sister who can't be trusted." Caleth reached out slowly, telegraphing his movement so she could pull away if she wanted. When she didn't, his hand cupped her cheek with devastating gentleness. His palm was warm, calloused from sword work, and Lyra had to fight the urge to lean into the touch. Lyra's eyes burned. She couldn't remember the last time someone had believed her about anything. "She's coming here," Caleth continued. "Seraphine, I gave her 3 days to settle her affairs in Ashenvale before presenting herself at court. She thinks it's an honor, a chance to be close to power, to influence." His smile was sharp and cold. "She has no idea what's waiting. And what are you going to do? That depends on you." His thumb brushed across her cheekbone, feather light. "This is your justice, Lyra. Your pain. I'll be the weapon, but you choose how it's wielded. Do you want her dead, exiled, stripped of everything she values, and forced to live the life she gave you?" The options made Lyra's head spin. She'd spent 12 years as a victim, powerless to change anything. The idea that she could choose Seraphine's fate felt impossible, dangerous, like a trap that would snap shut on her the moment she reached for it. "I don't know," she whispered. I can't think about this right now." Caleth's hand fell away immediately. "Then don't. There's time. 3 days before she arrives. You need to heal first. Eat, rest. Let the wolfsbane clear your system." He stood, moved back toward the door, giving her space. "The healers will check on you this afternoon. If you need anything at all, there are servants just outside. They'll bring whatever you ask for." He was leaving, giving her the room, the sanctuary, the safety, and Lyra realized with sudden clarity that she didn't want to be alone. 12 years of forced solitude had taught her to crave isolation as the only safe state. But right now, in this massive room that smelled of cedar and safety, the thought of being alone made panic claw at her throat. "Wait," Caleth turned immediately. "Yes, the scars on your chest. You said your uncle gave them to you." The words tumbled out before she could think better of them. Would you?" She didn't know how to finish the question, didn't know what she was asking for, but Caleth seemed to understand. He moved back to the bedside slowly, sat on the edge of the mattress, careful to keep distance between them. His hands went to the laces of his shirt. "My uncle Malachar challenged me for the throne when I turned 19. He said, fingers working the ties loose. Traditional combat. To the death. Winner takes the crown." He pulled the shirt over his head, and Lyra's breath caught. His torso was a landscape of violence. 4 parallel claw marks raked across his ribs, deep gouges that had healed into thick silvered scars. A blade cut ran from his left shoulder down across his chest. Burn marks scattered his abdomen. Other scars she couldn't identify, the kind that came from a lifetime of combat. "He was bigger than me. Stronger. More experienced." Caleth's voice was quiet, distant. "He got his claws into my ribs, tore through to the lung. I was drowning in my own blood, lying on the challenge ground, knowing I was about to die at 19 years old." Lyra found herself leaning forward, drawn by the raw honesty in his voice. "My wolf took over. Complete feral rage. I don't remember most of it, just pieces. His throat in my jaws, blood everywhere, the way he stopped struggling." Caleth's hands clenched against his thighs. "When I came back to myself, he was dead. I was covered in his blood. And 300 pack members were staring at me like I was a monster." "Were you—" The question slipped out before Lyra could stop it. Caleth looked at her. Really looked, amber eyes holding hers with uncomfortable intensity. Yes, in that moment I was. I became exactly the monster I needed to be to survive. Lyra understood that, had spent 12 years becoming exactly what she needed to be to survive Seraphine's cruelty. Small, quiet, invisible. The opposite of monstrous but equally shaped by violence. "Why are you telling me this?" she asked. "Because you looked at your reflection yesterday and saw something broken, something shameful, something that deserved what was done to it." His hand gestured to the scars crossing his chest. "I need you to understand that these marks, yours and mine, aren't evidence of weakness. They're evidence of survival, of becoming whatever we had to become to stay alive." He stood, pulled his shirt back on. "You're not broken, Lyra. You're a blade that hasn't been sharpened yet. But you will be. I promise you that." The words settled into her chest, foreign and strange, and almost painful in their kindness. Caliph moved toward the door again. This time Lyra let him go, watching as he paused in the doorway. "Eat something," he said without turning around. "Sleep, heal. Tomorrow we'll start teaching you how to be the queen this territory needs." Then he was gone, the heavy wooden door closing with a soft click. Lyra sat in the massive bed, surrounded by softness and safety, her hand pressed to her bandaged head. In the space of 12 hours, her entire existence had been rewritten, from servant to mate, from invisible to seen, from broken to what she didn't have words for, what Caliph thought she could become, didn't know how to imagine herself as anything other than what Seraphine had made her. But for the first time in 12 years, a small voice in the back of her mind whispered that maybe there was a different story possible. A different ending than the one she'd been running toward last night when she'd planned to disappear over the mountains. Lyra reached for the tray Caliph had brought, tore off a piece of bread. It was fresh, still warm, nothing like the stale crusts she usually ate. She took a bite, and the simple act of eating food that didn't taste like ashes felt revolutionary. Outside the windows, dawn was breaking over Thornhaven. Golden light spilled across the northern territories, illuminating forests and mountains and the vast wilderness that stretched to every horizon. Somewhere in the valley below, Seraphine was probably waking up, probably congratulating herself on successfully hiding Lyra away, on clearing the path to power. She had no idea that the mate bond had found her sister anyway, had no idea what was coming. Lyra took another bite of bread and allowed herself the smallest, darkest smile. 3 days until Seraphine arrived. 3 days to heal. 3 days to decide what justice looked like for 12 years of systematic torture. The wolfsbane was clearing from her system. For the first time since she was 9 years old, Lyra felt her wolf stir. Not the silence she'd grown accustomed to, but a presence. Sleeping still weakened, but there. Alive. She ate slowly, methodically, feeling strength return with each bite. The bread, the cheese, the dried fruit, the herbal tea that tasted of honey and something medicinal. When the tray was empty, Lyra lay back against the pillows. Let herself sink into softness. Let exhaustion pull her down into sleep. And for the first time in 12 years, she dreamed of something other than running. She dreamed of scars that weren't shameful, of blades being sharpened, of a bald queen standing in golden light, unafraid, unashamed, unstoppable. She dreamed of becoming the monster Seraphine had always feared she might be. Outside the chamber, Caliph Draven stood with his Beta Theron discussing guard rotations and security protocols. But his mind was elsewhere, on the woman sleeping in his bed, on the sister who would arrive in 3 days, on the violence he was going to unleash when justice finally came. Theron noticed the gold flickering in his Alpha's eyes. "You're planning something." "Yes, something brutal. Extremely." Theron had known Caliph since they were children, had seen him kill his uncle at 19, had watched him become the ruthless, controlled king the Northern Territories needed, had never seen this particular quality of rage simmering beneath his surface. "She matters to you, the girl." "She's not a girl. She's my mate, my queen." Caliph's voice was granite. "And someone spent 12 years torturing her, making her believe she was worthless, poisoning her, scarring her, breaking her down piece by piece. Seraphine Ashford, among others." Theron was quiet for a moment. "What do you need from me?" "A list. Everyone in Ashenvale who knew what was happening and did nothing. Everyone who participated, everyone who looked the way." Caliph's eyes flashed pure gold. "They all answer for it." "That's a lot of executions." "I'm aware." Theron nodded slowly. He'd been beta long enough to know when his Alpha's mind was made up. "I'll have the list by tomorrow." "Good." Caliph looked back at the closed door to his chambers, at the woman sleeping beyond it. 3 days. Then we show Seraphine exactly what happens when someone hurts what's mine. The Northern Territories were about to learn that their shadow wolf had found his mate, and anyone who'd laid hands on her was about to learn what true fear felt like. The second day, Lyra's wolf woke screaming. It started as a whisper, a stirring deep in her chest where nothing had moved for 12 years. Then pressure building, until it felt like her ribcage might crack open from the inside. Her wolf silence since age 9, suppressed by wolfsbane and Seraphine's systematic cruelty, was clawing its way back to consciousness. And it was furious. Lyra woke gasping, sheets tangled around her legs, sweat soaking through the fine nightgown. Her hands had shifted, partially nails elongated, to claws, fingers caught between human and wolf. Pain lanced through every bone as her body tried to remember what it meant to be more than just flesh and fear. She couldn't breathe, couldn't think. The wolf inside her was howling, raging, 12 years of suppressed instinct trying to emerge all at once. The door slammed open. Caliph was there in an instant, crossing the room in 3 strides. He took in her shifted hands, her gasping breaths, the way she was curled around herself, like she could physically hold the transformation back. "First emergence," he said, voice calm despite the urgency in his movements. "The wolfsbane is clearing your system. Your wolf is waking up. This is normal." "It hurts," Lyra gasped. "Make it stop, please, it hurts." I know it does." He knelt beside the bed, hands hovering over her but not touching. "But fighting makes it worse. You need to let her come forward, let her out." "I can't." Tears streamed down her face. "I don't know how. I've never." Seraphine said I couldn't shift. Said I was defective. Seraphine lied. Caliph's voice cut through the panic. "There's nothing defective about you. Your wolf was drugged into silence, but she's awake now and she's angry. You need to give her space." Another wave of pain crashed through her. Lyra felt her spine start to curve, vertebrae popping and reshaping. A scream tore from her throat. "Breathe," Caliph commanded. "Look at me. Lyra, look at me." She forced her eyes open, found his amber gaze steady, certain anchoring. "You're safe here. Nothing can hurt you. Your wolf knows that. She's trying to protect you the only way she knows how, by being strong, by being present. Let her." "I don't know how to let go," Lyra sobbed. 12 years of survival had been about control, about making herself small and quiet and manageable. Letting go meant losing that control, meant becoming something wild and potentially dangerous, meant becoming exactly what Seraphine had always said she was: mad, unstable, wrong. "Then I'll show you." Caliph stood, stepped back. "Watch." His shift was brutally fast. One moment he was a man, the next a massive black wolf stood where he'd been. Easily twice the size of a normal wolf, all muscle and midnight fur and molten gold eyes. Power radiated from him in waves, the physical manifestation of an alpha in his prime. But he didn't move toward her, didn't crowd or threaten, just stood there letting her see what she could become. Then he shifted back, the transformation flowing like water. Human again, breathing slightly harder, but otherwise unbothered by the change. "Your wolf isn't your enemy," he said quietly. "She's the part of you that survived when everything else wanted to break. Trust her. Let her out." Lyra closed her eyes, felt the pressure building again, the wolf clawing at her insides. Instead of fighting, she tried to relax, to open instead of clenching, closed. The pain intensified to a point beyond bearing. Bones cracked and reformed, her spine arched. Fur rippled across skin that had never known it. She felt her face elongate, jaw breaking and reshaping into a muzzle. Claws burst from fingertips. And then, the shift stopped halfway. Lyra hung suspended between forms. Not human, not wolf. Caught in the agonizing in-between body, unable to complete the transformation. She whimpered, a sound that came out distorted through her half-formed muzzle. "It's okay," Caliph said, and she realized he'd moved closer. Close enough to touch, though he still didn't. "First emergence after wolfsbane takes time. Your body needs to remember. Don't force it." He was quiet for a moment, then, "I'm going to touch you. Help guide the shift. Is that okay?" Lyra managed a nod through the pain. His hands settled on her shoulders, large, warm, steady. "Close your eyes. Feel where you're stuck. There." His fingers found the point between her shoulder blades where the transformation had frozen. "Your spine is trying to reshape, but the muscles are fighting it. You need to breathe through the pain, not against it." Lyra tried, failed. The agony was too much, too foreign, too overwhelming. "Let me help." Caliph's voice dropped to something almost like a growl. His alpha presence pushed against her, not demanding but offering, showing her wolf what complete transformation felt like, giving her a path to follow. Her wolf responded instinctively, drawn to the strength in his presence. The shift lurched forward. Fur completed its spread across her body. Her spine finished curving. Claws fully formed, but she still couldn't complete it. Still hung in that terrible halfway point. The wolfsbane damaged the neural pathways, Kayla said, and Lara heard frustration in his voice. Not at her at what had been done to her. 12 years of suppression. Your body's forgotten how to finish the transformation. He moved around to face her, amber eyes meeting her partially shifted ones. We'll work on it. Every day, you'll relearn what was stolen from you. But for now, his hands cupped her distorted face with impossible gentleness. Shift back. Go back to human. That direction should be easier. It was. The return to human form came with pain, but not the same resistance. Her bones clicked back into place. Fur receded. Within moments, she was human again, gasping and shaking, collapsing back against the pillows. Caliph pulled the blankets up around her shoulders. Rest. That was good, better than most first emergences after long suppression. I couldn't complete it, Lyra whispered. I'm broken. Seraphine was right. Seraphine poisoned you for 12 years. The words came out sharp, hard. Any damage to your wolf is her doing, not yours. You understand that? Lyra didn't answer, couldn't answer. Because deep down in the places Seraphine's voice had carved into her psyche, she still believed there was something fundamentally wrong with her. Caliph seemed to read that in her silence. He sat on the edge of the bed close enough that she could feel his warmth but not touching. When I was 19 and my uncle nearly killed me, the healer said I'd never shift again. Said the damage to my lung was too severe that the trauma would prevent transformation. He gestured to the scars on his chest visible through his unlaced shirt. It took me 8 months to complete a full shift. 8 months of halfway transformations and screaming pain and believing I'd lost my wolf forever. Lyra looked at him, at this powerful alpha who commanded the Northern Territories, trying to imagine him broken and struggling. What changed, she asked. I stopped believing what the healers told me about my limitations. Started believing what my wolf told me about my strength. His eyes held hers. You'll get there. But you need to stop hearing Seraphine's voice in your head telling you what you can't do. Easier said than done. 12 years of conditioning didn't vanish in 2 days, but Lyra nodded anyway, too exhausted to argue. Sleep, Caliph said, standing. The healers will bring something to help with the pain. Tomorrow we start training. Training, combat, politics, everything you need to be queen. His smile was sharp. Seraphine arrives in 2 days. I want you ready. The third day, Lyra met the court. She'd spent the morning with healers who documented every scar, every burn, every mark of systematic abuse. Their faces had grown progressively grimmer as they cataloged 12 years of cruelty. The head healer, an older woman named Marin, had touched the silver burns on Lyra's scalp with gentle fingers and said quietly, Child, what they did to you was monstrous. Lyra had no response to that, had lived with it so long that hearing it named as monstrous felt strange. Wrong somehow, like claiming victimhood when she should have been stronger, should have fought back, should have been anything other than what she'd been. Now she stood in the corridor outside the Great Hall wearing clothes that fit her properly for the first time in 12 years. Simple trousers and a tunic in dark blue, not the servant's brown she'd worn forever, not the elaborate court gowns she'd seen on noble ladies. Something practical, something that let her move. Her head was still bandaged. The cuts from Seraphine's silver blade were healing but not healed. Marin had offered a wig some way to cover the visible evidence of her humiliation. Lyra had refused. If she was going to face the court, face the wolves who would judge her question, her doubt, her right to stand beside their king, she was going to do it as she was, scarred, marked, undeniable. Caliph stood beside her close enough that their shoulders almost touched. He wore his formal leathers again, black and silver every inch the warrior king. But when he looked at her, his expression softened. You don't have to do this today, he said. We can wait. Give you more time. Seraphine arrives tomorrow. Lyra's voice was steadier than she felt. If I wait, I'll face the court for the first time with her here, watching, knowing she still has power over my fear. Caliph's eyes flashed gold with approval. Smart. Tactical. You're thinking like a queen already. The compliment sent warmth through her chest, but Lyra pushed it away. She couldn't afford softness right now. Couldn't afford to believe the kind words when her entire life had taught her that kindness was usually a prelude to cruelty. What do I do? She asked. How do I don't know how to be what they expect. You be exactly what you are. Caliph turned to face her fully. Scarred, surviving, stronger than they know. Let them underestimate you. That's a weapon, Lyra. Use it. Before she could respond, he pushed open the heavy doors to the great hall. 300 faces turned toward them. Lyra's first instinct was to duck her head, make herself small, invisible. 12 years of training, screaming that being seen meant being heard. But Kayla's hand found the small of her back, steady pressure that kept her spine straight. "Walk with me," he murmured. "Head up. You're not a servant anymore." They crossed the hall together. Every step felt like walking through fire. Lyra could feel the stairs burning into her bandaged head, her scarred arm, the too-thin frame that spoke of years of starvation. Could practically hear the thoughts, defective, damaged, wrong. Caliph led her to the high table where his council sat. Theron was there, the scarred beta she'd seen before. An older man with silver threading his dark hair, Elder Aldrich Grey. And a woman who made Lyra's skin crawl on sight. Beautiful, cold, wearing crimson silk like fresh blood. Hair so dark it looked black, swept into an elaborate style that probably took hours. She watched Lyra approach with eyes like a snake watching prey. "My counsel," Kalis said, voice carrying across the hall. "Allow me to present Lyra Draven, my mate and your queen." The silence that followed was deafening. Then Aldrich stood bowed. "My queen." His voice was respectful but cautious, reserving judgment. Theron followed suit. "My queen." The woman in crimson remained seated. When she finally spoke, her voice was honey over razors. "Isolde Ravenna, council mistress. We're all very surprised by the king's choice." The pause before surprised said everything. Shocked, appalled, convinced this was a mistake. Lyra felt Caliph tense beside her, but she spoke before he could. "I imagine you are. I'm sure you had other expectations for who would stand here." Isolde's smile didn't reach her eyes. "The king has always valued unexpected qualities." "Isolde." Caliph's voice carried a warning. "You will address my mate with respect, or you will find yourself addressing her from outside these walls. Permanently." The threat landed like a physical blow. Isolde's face went carefully blank, but Lyra saw rage flash in her eyes before she controlled it. "Of course, my king, my queen, forgive me. I meant no disrespect." The words were perfect, empty. "I'm simply concerned about certain practicalities. The law is quite specific about requirements for queens." "The law requires a bonded mate," Caliph said flatly. "Lyra is bonded to me. The law is satisfied." "Traditionally, yes, but there are questions of lineage station capability." "Are you questioning my judgment?" The temperature in the hall dropped 10 degrees. Every wolf present felt the alpha power radiating from Caliph, a reminder that he'd killed his own uncle to take this throne that he was called the Shadow Wolf for reasons that had nothing to do with poetry. Isolde lowered her eyes. "Never, my king." "Good, then we understand each other." Caliph turned to address the full hall. "I know many of you have questions, concerns. You expected me to choose from the presented nobles. Instead, I claimed a servant girl most of you never noticed existed." Murmurs rippled through the crowd. "Let me be very clear." His voice cut through the whispers like a blade. "The mate bond chose Lyra. Not politics, not bloodlines, not careful calculation. The bond's sacred, inarguable, witnessed by 300 of you. Anyone who questions that bond questions the fundamental laws that govern all of us." Silence fell again. "Furthermore," Kayla's hand moved to Lyra's shoulder, a gesture of protection and possession both. "Anyone who hurt her, who allowed her to be hurt, who stood by while she was systematically tortured for 12 years, you will answer for it. I will have a full accounting of every crime committed against my mate, and there will be justice." The words hung in the air like a death sentence. Lyra saw it then, the way certain faces in the crowd went pale. The way eyes darted away, refusing to meet Caliph's gaze. How many of them had known? How many had watched Seraphine's cruelty and done nothing? How many had participated? "My queen has shown me the scars you all pretended not to see." Caliph continued, voice dropping to something cold and deadly. "The burn on her arm from when she was 14, the marks on her back from years of beatings, the cuts on her scalp from 3 days ago when her own sister used a silver blade to humiliate her publicly." Someone in the crowd made a choked sound. "So yes, Isolde, there are questions of capability, but the question isn't whether Lyra is capable of being queen." His eyes swept the hall predator, assessing prey. "The question is whether any of you are capable of serving her after what you've done." The silence was absolute, suffocating. Then Aldrich Grey stood again. His voice was measured, careful. "My king speaks truth. We have failed in our duty to protect all members of our pack. This council will cooperate fully with any investigation. Those found guilty will face appropriate consequences. It was a political answer, non-committal enough to avoid immediate execution, but acknowledging enough to prevent outright rebellion. Caliph seemed to accept it. He gestured for Lyra to sit in the chair beside his, the queen's chair empty for as long as he'd ruled. She sat. The wood felt foreign beneath her, too grand, too presumptuous. Servants didn't sit at high tables, didn't claim spaces meant for people who mattered. But she was mated to an alpha king now. The bond said she belonged here even if every instinct screamed otherwise. The council meeting proceeded. Discussion of border patrols, trade agreements with eastern territories, disputes over hunting grounds. Political minutiae that Lyra barely followed. She stayed quiet watching, learning how power moved through this room. Isolde spoke often, always phrased as helpful suggestions, always delivered with that honey over razor's voice. But Lyra heard the challenges underneath. The subtle ways she questioned Caliph's decisions planted seeds of doubt, positioned herself as the voice of reason and tradition. This woman was dangerous. More dangerous than Seraphine because her cruelty was wrapped in silk and political acumen. When the meeting finally ended, Lyra felt drained. Holding herself rigid for 2 hours, maintaining the pretense of belonging, had exhausted her more than a full day of servant work. Caliph dismissed the council. They filed out slowly, many casting curious glances at Lyra. Some looked sympathetic, others skeptical, a few openly hostile. When only Theron remained, Caliph turned to his beta. The list, Theron produced a rolled parchment. 47 names, everyone in Ashenvale who witnessed abuse and did nothing. 8 who actively participated, including your mate's sister. 47. Lyra's breath caught. That many people had known, had watched, had let it happen. "What are you going to do?" she asked quietly. Caliph looked at her, and for a moment his mask of kingly control slipped. She saw the rage underneath, the violence he was barely containing. "That's your decision. I told you this is your justice. I'm just the weapon. I don't know how to decide something like that." Lyra's voice cracked. "I've never had power over anything. I don't know how to wield it." "Then start learning." He moved closer, knelt so they were eye level. "Tomorrow Seraphine arrives. She'll walk into this hall expecting to be welcomed, celebrated, positioned close to power. Instead, she'll face you, whole, healing, standing beside me as queen." Lyra imagined it, Seraphine's face when she saw her broken sister crowned, the shock, the fury, the loss of control. The thought made something dark and satisfied curl in her chest. "I want her to know what she took from me," Lyra said slowly. "I want her to see what I could have been all along if she hadn't spent 12 years trying to destroy me." Caliph's smile was sharp with approval. "Then let's show her." That night, Lyra dreamed of shifting. In the dream, the transformation came easily, painlessly. Her body flowed from human to wolf, like water, effortless and natural. She ran through forests powerful and whole, her wolf finally free after 12 years of silence. But when she looked down, her fur was matted with blood. And the voice in her head wasn't her wolf's, it was Seraphine's. Broken, defective, wrong. She woke, gasping, sheets tangled, sweat soaked. The room was dark except for dying embers in the hearth. For a moment, she couldn't remember where she was, why she wasn't in her cellar pallet, why the door opened quietly. Caliph stood backlit by corridor torches. He must have heard her nightmare come to check. He didn't enter, just stood in the doorway. "Do you need anything?" Lyra should have said no, should have sent him away, handled her fear alone like she'd always done. But the darkness felt suffocating, and her sister's voice was still echoing in her skull, and she was so tired of being alone. "Stay," she whispered. "Please, just stay." He crossed the room without hesitation, sat in the chair beside her bed, close enough to touch, but not touching. "I'm here." "Tell me something," Lyra said into the darkness. "Something true. Something that makes this feel real instead of a dream I'm going to wake from." Caliph was quiet for a long moment. Then, "There was one night I haven't told you about," he said quietly. Lyra turned her head to look at him. His face was half-shadowed, amber eyes catching the faint ember light. 6 months ago, I came to Ashenvale for a border dispute negotiation. It was late past midnight. I couldn't sleep. Walked the grounds." He paused. "I found you in the stables. You were crying. Trying to be quiet about it, but I heard." Lyra remembered that night. Seraphine had burned her with hot soup, claimed it was an accident, made Lyra apologize to the court for being clumsy. The humiliation had been crushing. "I almost revealed myself," Caliph continued. "Almost went to you. But you started singing, this old lullaby my mother used to sing, and you stopped crying, just sat there in the dark singing yourself calm. He leaned forward, elbows on his knees. That's when I knew. Before I understood about the mate bond, before I could name what I felt, I knew you were important, that you mattered, that I needed to find out who you were. Lyra's throat tightened. Why didn't you? You were hiding from something. I didn't want to be one more threat. His eyes found hers in the darkness. If I'd pushed harder, investigated, I might have stopped her years ago. Seraphine hides her cruelty well. Even I didn't see it for what it was until you named it. Lyra's voice was quiet but certain. That doesn't make it right that I didn't look. Lyra sat up slowly, looked at this powerful man blaming himself for cruelties he hadn't committed, hadn't even known about. Seraphine is very good at hiding her monsters. She's had practice. That doesn't absolve me. No, but it means the fault is hers, not yours. Lyra surprised herself with the certainty in her voice. You found me eventually. You claimed me when you could have walked away from a damaged servant girl. You believed me when no one else has. That has to count for something. Caliph was quiet, processing. Then sleep. Tomorrow we face Seraphine, together. He started to stand, but Lyra's hand shot out, catching his wrist. The chair is uncomfortable. The bed is large. I don't mean... She stumbled over the words, heat rising in her cheeks. But Caliph seemed to understand. Are you sure? She nodded. He moved around to the other side of the bed, lay down on top of the covers, keeping space between them. Close enough to provide comfort, far enough to maintain boundaries. Lyra settled back into the pillows, found that she could breathe easier with him there, the darkness less suffocating. Seraphine's voice quieter. Caliph, yes, thank you for seeing me when no one else did. His hand found hers in the darkness, squeezed once. Always. Lyra closed her eyes and let herself believe it. Let herself believe that maybe possibly she was more than what 12 years had made her. Tomorrow Seraphine would arrive. Tomorrow justice would begin. But tonight, for the first time since she was 9 years old, Lyra Ashford, no Lyra Draven, fell asleep feeling safe. Seraphine Ashford arrived at Thornhaven in a gilded carriage drawn by 4 white horses. She wore rose-pink silk that caught the afternoon light, her golden hair cascading in elaborate braids woven through with pearls. Servants had spent hours on her appearance, the perfect balance of mourning widow and available noble. Beautiful but not provocative. Grieving but ready to move forward. Everything calculated to position herself as the ideal companion for a king who'd made a regrettable choice in the heat of mate bond madness. She'd spent 3 days preparing, rehearsing her concerned sister act, planning how she'd gently, carefully suggest that perhaps Lyra wasn't quite ready for the demands of queenship, how she'd offer to stay to help to guide her poor damaged sister through this transition she clearly couldn't handle alone. And once she was established at court close to power, indispensable, well, accidents happened. Lyra was fragile, unstable. Everyone knew it. If she happened to have another episode, if she hurt herself or simply disappeared one night, who would be surprised? Seraphine smiled as the carriage rolled through Thornhaven's gates. This was all working out better than she dared hope. The smile died when she saw who waited in the courtyard. Lyra stood on the steps of the great hall, and she was nothing like the broken creature Seraphine had left bleeding in Ashenvale Square 4 days ago. She wore deep midnight blue, not servant's brown, not the rags Seraphine had forced her into for 12 years. A fine tunic and trousers that fit her properly made her look less like a victim and more like someone who belonged in a royal court. Her head was still bandaged, but she'd wrapped it in dark blue cloth that matched her outfit, turning the necessity into something almost deliberate, almost powerful. But it was her eyes that made Seraphine's breath catch. Lyra had always looked down, always kept her gaze submissive, defeated, carefully blank. The eyes of someone who'd learned that showing emotion meant giving her tormentor ammunition. Now she looked directly at Seraphine, and her eyes were hard, knowing, unafraid. Beside her stood Caliph Draven in full ceremonial armor, black leather and silver wolf head, buckles every inch the warrior king. His hand rested on Lyra's shoulder, not possessive, but protective. Claiming her, publicly leaving, no doubt about where his loyalty lay. Behind them, 50 guards lined the steps, silent, watchful, waiting. This wasn't a welcome. This was a trial. Seraphine's mind raced as her carriage stopped. She could still salvage this, could still play the devoted sister, the concerned family member. Could still Seraphine Ashford, Caliph's voice carried across the courtyard, formal and cold. You stand accused of 12 years of systematic torture against Lyra Draven. mate of the Alpha King and Queen of the Northern Territories. The words hit like hammer blows. Accused. Torture. Not alleged mistreatment or family difficulties torture. Seraphine stepped from the carriage, forcing her face into shocked innocence. My king, I don't understand. Torture Lyra is my sister. I've cared for her since our father's death. You poisoned her with wolfsbane daily for 12 years. Caliph descended the steps, and Seraphine fought the urge to retreat from the raw power radiating from him. 3 drops every morning in her food, enough to suppress her wolf, prevent bonding, keep her weak and dependent. That's not she needed medicine. She was unstable. Show her. Caliph's command was directed at Lyra. Lyra unwrapped the bandage from her head slowly, deliberately. Revealed the cuts still healing, the silver burns scarring her scalp when the evidence of the blade Seraphine had used just 4 days ago. You did this, Lyra said quietly. Her voice was steady, controlled. Nothing like the broken whisper Seraphine was used to. In the village square, in front of 200 witnesses, you used a silver blade deliberately dull, and you carved shame into my skin. I was trying to help you, Seraphine protested, but her voice cracked. You were humiliating the family, unbonded at 21. I was making you presentable. You were making me broken. Lyra pulled up her sleeve, showed the 8-inch burn scar. Age 14, you held my arm over hearth flames while pressing a hot silver poker into my flesh because an alpha's son asked me to dance. Seraphine's carefully constructed mask was cracking. He was too good for you. You needed to understand your place. My place. Lyra's laugh was bitter. I was 9 years old when father died. 9, and you made me a servant in my own home. Locked me in cellars. Starved me. Beat me. Spent 12 years systematically destroying anything that might have made me whole. She descended the steps, moving with a grace Seraphine had never seen in her, had never allowed her to develop. With each step, Lyra seemed to grow larger, more solid, while Seraphine felt herself shrinking. You told me I was defective, damaged, that something was wrong with me. Lyra stopped 3 paces away, close enough that Seraphine could see the gold flickering in her eyes, her wolf no longer suppressed, stirring just beneath the surface. But the only thing wrong was you, your jealousy, your cruelty, your need to make me small so you could feel big. I loved you, Seraphine tried desperately. Everything I did was to protect you. You loved controlling me. Lyra's voice was granite. You loved having someone you could hurt without consequences. You loved the power it gave you. Seraphine looked past Lyra to where Caliph stood, searching for any sympathy, any doubt about his mate's accusations. Found nothing but cold certainty and barely leashed violence. My king, surely you don't believe she's always been prone to delusions. We have 47 witnesses who saw you abuse her over the years and did nothing. Caliph's voice cut through her protests. 8 who actively participated. The head healer has documented every scar, every burn, every mark of systematic torture on her body. We have testimony from servants who watched you poison her food, from the blacksmith who sold you the silver blade you used 4 days ago. The trap closed around her. Seraphine felt it inescapable, absolute. They'd been building a case, gathering evidence. This wasn't a reconciliation. This was an execution. What do you want? She asked, dropping the pretense. Her voice went cold, showing the predator underneath the silk and pearls. Money, I'll pay, whatever. I want you to know what you took from me, Lyra said quietly. I want you to understand what I could have been if you hadn't spent 12 years breaking me down, piece by piece. She stepped closer. Seraphine retreated until her back hit the carriage. I could have bonded years ago, could have had a mate, a family, a life, but you poisoned that possibility every single day. Lyra's eyes blazed. I could have been strong, confident, whole, but you beat that out of me, starved it out of me, carved it out of me with silver blades. You were nothing, Seraphine hissed, her own mask finally shattering completely. You were always nothing, father's disappointment, the weak daughter. I did the world a favor trying to make you useful. I was a child, Lyra's voice cracked on the word. I was 9 years old and grieving my father, and you turned me into your personal victim because it made you feel powerful. Silence fell over the courtyard. 300 witnesses watched the confrontation, nobles who'd traveled to see the infamous, sister guards who'd heard the stories, servants who'd lived in fear of their own master's cruelty. They all saw it, the moment Seraphine's beautiful mask shattered completely, showing the monster underneath. So what now? Seraphine demanded. You'll execute me. Make yourself feel better by becoming exactly what you hate. No. Lyra stepped back. Execution would be too quick, too easy. You'd die never understanding what you did wrong. She turned to Caliph, and something passed between them, a silent communication, a shared understanding. Seraphine Ashford, Caliph's voice rang with formal authority. You are hereby stripped of all titles, lands, and privileges. Your mate bond to the late Alpha Rowan is severed posthumously. You will have no claim to Ashenvale or its territories. Seraphine's face went white. You can't. You are sentenced to 5 years indentured servitude. Caliph continued implacable. You will work in Ashenvale's kitchens, stables, and laundries. You will sleep in the servants' quarters. You will eat last and least. You will be called by your function, not your name. You will learn exactly what you forced your sister to endure. No, the word came out strangled. No, I'm nobility. You're nothing. Lyra's voice was soft but absolute. Just like you told me I was for 12 years. Now you'll understand what that feels like. Furthermore, Caliph said, any act of cruelty toward other servants, any attempt to reclaim status or influence, any violation of your sentence, and you will be executed, publicly, slowly, with the same silver blade you used on my mate. Guards moved forward, flanking Seraphine. She looked wildly between them, searching for escape, finding none. This isn't justice, she spat. This is revenge. This is mercy, Lyra interrupted, because I could have asked for your death. Could have demanded you suffer everything you put me through, amplified until you beg for the end. But I'm not you, Seraphine. I'm not the monster you tried to make me. She turned away, dismissing her sister as thoroughly as Seraphine had dismissed her for 12 years. Walked back up the steps to where Caliph waited, his hand extending to take hers. Take her to Ashenvale, Caliph commanded the guards. Make sure everyone in that territory knows what she did. Make sure they understand that anyone who harms servants, who abuses power, who turns cruelty into entertainment, will face the same justice. The guards hauled Seraphine toward a simple cart, not the gilded carriage she'd arrived in. She screamed, fought, threatened. But her voice faded as they dragged her away, just another criminal being transported to her sentence. When silence finally fell over the courtyard, Lyra realized she was shaking, not from fear, from relief, from the overwhelming weight of justice finally delivered. Caliph's arm came around her shoulders, solid and warm. You did well. I didn't kill her. Lyra's voice was barely a whisper. Part of me wanted to hurt her the way she hurt me. But you didn't, because you're stronger than she ever was. He turned her to face him, amber eyes serious. Mercy from a position of power, that's what separates queens from tyrants. Around them, the court began to disperse. But Lyra noticed the way servants walked a little taller, made eye contact a little more freely. They'd seen one of their own rise, seen abuse punished, seen that maybe possibly they mattered. 3 months later, Lyra stood in the training yard, blade raised, facing Theron across packed dirt. Sweat soaked her tunic despite the autumn chill. Her muscles screamed from an hour of drills. But she held her stance, waiting. Theron lunged. Lyra didn't retreat. Caliph had beaten that instinct out of her weeks ago. Instead, she pivoted, used his momentum against him, brought her practice blade up in an arc that would have opened his throat if it had been real steel. The beta went down hard. Lay in the dirt, breathing heavily, a grin splitting his scarred face. You're getting too good at this. Good. Lyra extended a hand, helped him up. I have a lot of catching up to do. Around the training yard's perimeter, a dozen younger wolves watched, mostly unbonded females from lower ranks who'd started attending her morning sessions, learning that they could be more than decorative, more than victims waiting to happen. Lyra had made it her mission. The forgotten ones, the overlooked, the systematically dismissed, they were her people now. And she taught them to fight, to speak, to take up space unapologetically. Queen Lyra, a servant approached, bowing, not from fear but respect. The council is assembled. Lyra nodded, sheathed her practice blade, caught sight of her reflection in the polished steel bald head, no longer bandaged, scars visible, and unashamed. 3 noble daughters had shaved their own heads in solidarity last month. The movement was spreading, bald as a symbol of strength, survival refusing to hide. She walked toward the great hall, Theron falling into step beside her. Over the past months, she'd learned the rhythms of court, the way power moved through careful words and calculated alliances, how to read the subtext beneath political courtesy. Isolde Ravenna had tested her twice more subtle challenges wrapped in silk. Lyra had shut her down both times using the same legal text she'd spent nights memorizing. The council mistress was learning slowly that the servant girl knew how to wield words as weapons. The great hall was full. Not just council members, but petitioners from across the territories. Lyra had opened the hearings, made them public. Let common wolves bring grievances directly to their queen instead of filtering through layers of noble gatekeepers. Caliph had sat on his throne, and beside it the queen's chair was no longer empty. Lyra took her place, felt the weight of 300 watching eyes. Once that would have made her small, now it made her certain. First petition, she announced. An older woman stepped forward. My queen, I'm from Ashenvale. I wanted to report the servant who was sentenced 3 months ago. She tried to organize the other workers, tried to get them to refuse their duties. Lyra's expression didn't change, but something cold settled in her chest. Seraphine Ashford violated the terms of her sentence. Yes, my queen, she said. The woman hesitated. She said you weren't really queen, that the mate bond was fake, that she'd be restored to power soon. Calith's growl was audible throughout the hall. Bring her here, Lyra said quietly. Tomorrow, in chains. The woman bowed and retreated. Lyra felt Calith's hand find hers squeezed back. She'd hoped Seraphine would serve her sentence, quietly learn something from the experience. But her sister's cruelty ran too deep. Some people couldn't be saved from themselves. Tomorrow, Calith murmured, you decide her fate again. Lyra nodded. This time there would be no mercy, no second chances, just the justice she should have demanded the first time. But for now she turned to the next petitioner. To the work of building a kingdom where servants mattered, where the forgotten were seen, where cruelty faced consequences. She was Lyra Draven, the scarred queen, the wolf who'd been suppressed for 12 years and emerged stronger for it, and she was just getting started. The next morning, Seraphine Ashford arrived in iron shackles. 3 months as a servant had stripped her beauty like paint peeling from rotted wood. Golden hair hung in matted tangles, dull and lifeless. Porcelain skin roughened from lye soap and hard labor. The elegant creature who'd arrived in rose silk was gone, replaced by a hollow-eyed woman, broken by the same work she'd forced on her sister. But not broken enough. Guards hauled her before the throne, before Lyra, who sat crowned in midnight, blue bald head, bare scars catching morning light like badges of honor. Seraphine Ashford. Lyra's voice carried across the silent hall. You violated your sentence, attempted to organize rebellion among servants, spread lies about my legitimacy as queen. Seraphine lifted her chin, a ghost of her old arrogance. Because you're still nothing, still the broken. Strip her. Guards pulled the servant's dress to her waist. Seraphine's back showed whip marks, fresh welts from 3 months of the casual cruelty she'd dealt for 12 years. Surface wounds. Nothing compared to the systematic torture she'd inflicted. I gave you mercy, Lyra said, descending the dais steps slowly, each footfall deliberate, measured. 5 years to learn, to understand what you'd done, to change. She stopped before her sister. You chose cruelty again, chose to spread poison again. I won't make that mistake twice. Lyra turned to the court. Execute her, publicly, with the silver blade she used on me. Seraphine's arrogance shattered. No, Lyra, please, I'm your sister. I had a sister once, Lyra said softly. You killed her when I was 9 years old. The execution happened at dawn the next day. Not prolonged torture, not the hours of agony Seraphine deserved. Just swift, clean justice, the kind delivered by a queen who refused to become the monster her abuser had been. Lyra watched from the courtyard steps as the headsman raised the same silver blade Seraphine had used in Ashenvale Square, the blade that had carved 17 cuts that had burned and scarred and humiliated. It fell. Seraphine's head rolled across cobblestones, golden hair matted with blood. 400 witnesses saw it, saw that cruelty had consequences, saw that their queen delivered justice, not revenge. Lyra felt nothing when it ended. No satisfaction, no grief, no vindication, just emptiness, where 12 years of pain had lived a hollow space that would eventually fill with something better. It's done, Calith murmured, beside her hand warm at her back. Yes, Lyra said, voice steady. Now it's truly done. 2 weeks after Seraphine's execution, Lyra stood in moonlit forest beyond Thornhaven's walls. Calith waited in wolf form, massive, midnight, furred patient, gold eyes watching as Lyra reached for the transformation that had eluded her for months. This time her wolf answered. The shift flowed like water finding its course. No pain, no resistance, just her body remembering what wolfsbane had stolen, what 12 years had buried. Silver-white fur rippled across skin, bones reshaped with liquid grace. When the transformation completed, Lyra stood on 4 legs whole for the first time in her life. Her wolf's eyes were the same amber gold as her human ones. Caliph shifted his massive head, acknowledging her. Not as lesser, as equal. They ran, through ancient forests and over mountain streams, two wolves racing under stars. Lyra's wolf sang with each stride, sang with joy, with power, with the pure pleasure of finally being complete. When they shifted back hours later, dawn breaking, Lyra was laughing. There you are, Caliph said, pressing his forehead to hers. My wolf, my queen, my mate. I forgot what it felt like, Lyra whispered, tears streaming, good tears, healing tears. To be whole. You'll never forget again. 6 weeks after Seraphine's execution, Isolde Ravenna requested an audience with the queen. Lyra received her in the council chamber. Caliph standing silent, a reminder that the scarred queen wasn't alone. Isolde entered, wearing simple gray instead of crimson. No jewelry, no elaborate hair. She looked smaller, diminished. My queen, Isolde said, and for once the words held no venom. I come to tender my resignation from the council. Lyra studied her. Why, poem? Because you've won. Isolde's smile was bitter but genuine. You've dismantled every alliance I built, promoted wolves loyal to you, changed laws I spent decades crafting, all within legal boundaries I couldn't challenge. She paused. I underestimated you. That was my mistake. Will you cause trouble from exile? Lyra asked directly. No. Isolde met her eyes. I was cruel through politics, not torture. There's a difference. You've shown mercy to those who deserved it, justice to those who didn't. I respect that even as I resent losing to it. Lyra considered. You may retire to your family estates, keep your title, your lands, your dignity, but your voice in Thornhaven's politics is done. Isolde bowed deeper than protocol required. Thank you, my queen. As she left, Caliph murmured, you could have exiled her completely. I could have, Lyra agreed, but she was right. There's a difference between political maneuvering and systematic torture. I won't blur that line. 6 months after the claiming ceremony, Queen Lyra Draven stood on Thornhaven's battlements at dawn. The kingdom stretched below transformed. In training yards, unbonded females practiced combat. In the great hall, common wolves brought grievances directly to their queen. In the market, a statue was being raised, a bald woman with scars, sword in hand. The scarred queen. Caliph joined her at the parapet. Do you ever regret it, choosing mercy when you could have chosen revenge? Lyra touched her bald scalp, monthly ritual of reclamation. I regret mercy was necessary, but not who I became. She turned to him. Seraphine tried to make me a monster. If I'd become one to defeat her, she'd have won anyway. That's what makes you a queen, not a tyrant. Below the kingdom woke. Wolves across territories whispered about the scarred queen who'd turned shame into strength, who'd built a court where servants mattered, where cruelty faced consequences. I love you, Lyra said, first time speaking the words aloud. I love you too. His forehead touched hers. My wolf, my queen, my equal. Lyra closed her eyes and felt her wolf stir, no longer suppressed, no longer silent. Just waiting, just whole, just free. 2 weeks ago, she'd run through forests as a silver wolf, finally complete after 12 years of captivity. Yesterday, she'd opened council to 3 common-born members. Tomorrow, she'd train with Theron, review new protection laws, hear petitions. But right now, standing on battlements with her mate as sun rose, feeling scars that had become strength, this was enough. This was everything. The girl who'd knelt in mud while her sister carved shame into her scalp had become a queen who carved justice into law. The servant who'd believed herself worthless had become a leader who gave worth to the worthless. The broken wolf, silenced for 12 years, had found her voice and roared. Lyra Draven, the scarred queen, smiled as dawn broke over her kingdom. She was ready.